How many people heard of ensemble modeling before today? Wow. Okay, so that was 1 2/2, right? Because you were just like, yeah, I don't know, a few. Okay, which means if I were to ask the other question, how many people never heard of ensemble before today? Right? Yeah. It's one of those tests to make sure all the arms are working. So excellent, good. Well, welcome. Yeah, I think I'm going to dive right in. We'll have some time for Q&A as we get towards the end of the session. So probably the best thing to do is to jump in. Like I said, first important word is welcome. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit about data warehousing, not too shockingly. This will be all of a 3-minute conversation, so no stress there. We're going to talk about this principle called unified decomposition and what that means. And then we'll get into the concepts around ensemble modeling, what ensemble modeling is. A little more detail on the objectives. What are the characteristics of a data warehouse? What are the modeling requirements? What are the implications? And if we look at unified decomposition, we should take away some understanding about agility, managing history, and integration and interpretations. We'll get into that. And then ensemble modeling, agile techniques, and the interesting discussion around key dependency. How many people have heard of Data Vault before today? Okay, see, that's a lot more. So that's good. That ties well with ensemble, so we'll have that conversation. Okay, first of all, with data warehousing, I'm not going to ask, right? It would be an arm test. How many people have heard of data warehousing before? Okay, just testing. You know, nobody can sleep this way if you do that. Data warehousing, integrated, non-volatile, time-variant, subject-oriented data, right? Bill Emmons actually here with us. Everybody see him? Yeah? Okay, good, he's here. This definition actually is pretty interesting when you think about it, because it's been around now since Bill wrote it in '84. It's not a new principle per se, but if you think about what it means that we're creating a database layer that has to deal with multi-point, multi-source integration, which is not necessarily true of operational systems, and it's really not true of what we're going to do on the data Mart side. Assuming, again, you source your Mart from a central warehouse. Okay, it's a different requirement. Likewise, it's time variant. So that means we're going to track history, and because it's non-volatile, that means we're not going to ever delete anything, which puts us in an insert-only environment. So it's a very different kind of way of modeling than we were doing prior to that point. Today, we can also add a few other requirements into the warehousing world. We can say, well, it has to be agile, right? Starting about 3-4 years ago, if you were speaking on a data warehousing conference and you didn't use the word agile, you were kicked out. That was it. It's like, well, you're not allowed to be here. You didn't say agile. Now, of course, it's also big data and maybe virtualization or in-memory. But now you've heard me say all those things, right? So I can still stay? All right, good. A couple other things that came up is auditable. So if you were here for the keynote, one of the things that happened is that banking and financial industries tend to lead the first deployments of things like Vault. Well, that's interesting, right? One of those factors deals with auditability. Well, not too much of a question, right? We know what's been going on with banking the last 15-year window. So there's a lot of compliance initiatives. And then compliance initiatives require data to be auditable back to the source. Okay, that makes sense. Predictable, okay, it should be something that will work in the same way, be scalable, repeatable pattern, and also predictable results. Like, so we know how we can make this happen the same way each time. All right, so there's a few other characteristics. Unified decomposition. This sounds like something that shouldn't belong together. Right? I mean, decomposition sounds like I'm taking things apart. And unified sounds like I'm putting stuff back together again. So you could read that and say, Hans, just make up your mind, right? Do you want to use decomposition or do you want to use unification? What is it you're trying to do? How many people ever worked with something like object-oriented? Modeling, techniques, software development, anything object-oriented? Yeah, so there's a few more hands go up with that. So, one of the premises is encapsulation, right? Encapsulation meaning, you put the methods and data together and you form this thing. In our data modeling careers, we've also been practicing a form of encapsulation. But put that in the back of your mind for a second. We're going to go into a scenario. How many people have today or have had an 8-year-old? A kid, not an 8-year-old car or an 8-year-old cat. Okay, all right, no one said. How many people have ever seen an 8-year-old? Okay, fair enough. So I'm a data warehousing professional. I go home from work, and I've had a hard day. Why have I had a hard day? Well, I have a third normal form or dimensional warehouse. Say third normal form, it's fine. And just today, someone came in to me and said, hey, guess what, Hans? We have this issue that we have 3 more attributes that need to be added to the customer. So you're going to have to make those engineering changes and ETL changes and whatever. And of course, it's a ripple effect, and it's going to take 3 months before we can go in production, whatever. It's a pain. So I get home from work, and I'm not feeling great. So I'm just like, oh, what a day. Killer day. And my 8-year-old runs up and says, hey, Dad, you're home. Yeah, that's great. But can tell right away there's something wrong. She says, oh, well, Dad, what's wrong? I say, yeah, you wouldn't understand. Oh, yeah, tell me. Okay, all right. There's this thing at work, and you can picture it's just really, really big, and it's really important. And then every time the smallest thing changes, I got to change the whole thing. And then there's ripple effects all over. It's killing me, right? And now it's the part where your 8-year-old kid is sitting there and going, yeah, but Dad, well, why don't you just separate the things that are changing from the things that are not changing, right? I mean, okay, and this is, of course, me as a parent, I say something wise like, go to bed, right? Something like that, because I have no response to that. So we can kind of ask ourselves the same question, right? Why is it, if you're in third normal form or a dimensional warehouse, and you have this issue of hardening of the model, high re-engineering costs, lack of agility in responding to change, that we haven't just said, well, let's spread it out. And I'm going to just split things apart, right? Well, I can give you some ideas as to why we haven't done it, is because we haven't really realized that it was a good option. Why is it not a good option? Because third normal form has taught us to encapsulate, right? To use that word again, right? To encapsulate all the attributes that depend on a certain key into that table, into the actual table form. As a matter of fact, if I were to quiz you and say, what's the first rule of third normal form? I would venture to guess several of you would probably say, all the attributes depend on the key, right? That's pretty much the rule. If I were to take some of the attributes that depend on the key and put them into a different table, right? Whether it be an entity or a dimension, then you would say, whoa, time out. You're no longer in third normal form, right? That's not good. If the attribute depends on the key, it's got to be in that table, in that entity. If you're in a dimension, especially if it's a type 2 conformed dimension in a federated Mart environment, you're going to say, no, wait, you can't take out any. They belong in, that's conformed. They have to all be there, right? Because what's happened to us is that if I were to not follow the rule of third normal form, or if I were to build data marts that didn't have conformed dimensions, I would have copies of things lying all over the place. I would have redundancy in copies. And what would happen is what? Anybody? What's the problem with that redundancy or those copies?
Data goes apart.
The data goes?
It can change on one side and not on the other side?
Yeah, they go out of sync. the data goes rogue, right? It doesn't match up anymore. Data redundancy in third normal form is eliminated, right? You can put redundancy, big red cross. It's not allowed in third normal form. How do we get rid of it? Key dependency, put it in the table, right? Because if we have redundancy, the problem is I could update one and not the other, and then they're out of sync, and we have data anomalies. In a Mart environment, why do we have federated Marts with just one master conformed dimension? Why not have 15 copies of the dimension? Well, because then they could be different. I could change one and not the other. They could be out of sync. So I have to force them together. But the thing is, what is it that's actually forcing them together? Well, we put them in one table to make sure they're, okay, yeah, you put them in one table and make sure they're together, but what is it that really forces them into that table? Besides you, right? Not your 8-year-old, but you, right? It's a key constraint, right? It's a key constraint. I'm saying all these things here depend on that key. It's a key dependency, rather, key dependency. So everything in there has to depend on the key. What happens with ensemble modeling is we bring up the question, right? If it makes sense to separate things for the reasons of responding to change, agility, less re-engineering, maybe things that change at different rates, or things that are interpreted in different ways, right? If it makes sense to split those things out, then can't I do that and at the same time have this is more optimal for the data warehouse? Of course it is. Well, why? Well, because we have integration as part of our first part of the definition. Integrated, non-volatile, time-variant, subject-oriented. Integrated, more than one source. Sources can conflict. I have to decide on a master record. I have to have a gold record. Wow, if I could just put them alongside each other and retain them, that would be easier, right? Non-volatile time variant. Okay, so it changes over time, but I've got some attributes that change all the time. And I have some attributes that really never change. Can I just separate those? Of course it makes good sense. So I do that. Now the thing is, again, you have to get comfortable as a modeler with the idea that we're going to separate into multiple forms, but we're going to retain a key dependency. By the way, unified decomposition, and you can say, well, it sounds cool, right? EMF, this is the first time you've heard EMF. It's probably the first time EMF has been said. So you can go back and say, yeah, to your colleagues. You guys know about EMF? Like, what? No, yeah, you probably wouldn't understand if I told you, but, kind of ensemble modeling form, but just ensemble modeling. Ensemble modeling is a family of modeling techniques. You could say it's a modeling technique of its own, but it's a family of modeling techniques that really take into account representing a core business concept like customer, like product, like whatever, right? And putting it into a constellation, and every part of that constellation has a key dependency with one key. So it will act as if it were part of an entity. It will act as if it were part of a dimension. But physically it's being split out. Okay, physically it's being split out. Which helps us again with our agility in the data warehousing modeling arena. And it actually helps us quite a lot because it's not just about the physical changes and the ETL changes. It's also about the logical, right? Because if things are interpreted in different ways, how do I know which one to pick, right? So if you have them alongside each other, you have full history of all different interpretations, if that's the way you choose to model it, okay? So I'll highlight two things in here. One is the second part of the paragraph down below, okay? It says, an ensemble is typically based on all things defining a core business concept, again, like customer, vendor, whatever, product, that can be uniquely and specifically said for one instance of that concept. Again, the key dependency. But you know what's interesting about that last part of the paragraph there, that second sentence? If I said that, you could say a dimension, conformed, blah, 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 same definition. An entity in a third normal form data warehouse around a core concept. You could say the same thing, right? There's something here that says it's really maintaining the definition and integrity of our key dependency and how that works. So as I was working on writing the book for modeling Agile data warehouse, I was looking for a word that could be used for this kind of family of techniques. And quite honestly, that was one of the most frustrating parts about working with this, because any word you can imagine that has something to do with like groupings or constellation, it's all been used, right? Okay, it's all been used in data warehousing, let alone data management. So it just was going to be tainted by some other stuff. And so I found the word ensemble, and I said, okay, well, that works. Technically, the definition's great. But, you know, yeah, it's a French word. Yeah, you know, who wants that? No, not so bad. But what really kind of twisted my arm was this definition in green here, because that's really what we want to say. What we want to say is all the parts of a thing taken together, right? So that each part is considered only in relation to the whole. Now, if you just absorb that for a minute, just say, okay, all the parts of a thing taken together, but so that each part is only considered in relation to the whole. Well, that makes sense. You can't address a cluster of attributes in a dimension without addressing the dimension. That's the key, is the dimension, right? Same thing in third normal form. So it makes sense that that definition works. I can tell you that there's something magical about that, because it not only helps us to understand how to model an ensemble form, whichever form, but it also helps us to understand when we've done something wrong, right? Because if we have an ensemble defining something like a concept, like a customer, and you were to take all those parts and kind of just bunch them together logically, just kind of bunch them all back together, would that resulting table form be in third normal form? Or would it be like a conformed dimension? Because if not, if it doesn't fit, then we haven't really maintained the rule 1 of third normal form or rule 1 of conformed dimensions. We've done something wrong, right, with that model. So let's, before I flip the page, or actually I will flip the page, it'll be easier to do this. Last 3 years now, maybe, Lars, 4 years? Maybe 4 years, yeah. In different locations around the world, things have popped up. Now, I'm going to just say, sorry if I offend every other country in the world for a minute, but you know, the Dutch are leading vault and doing all that great stuff and what. Hey, Sverige, which means go Sweden, basically. Several of them are in Sweden. And then there's one that sounds like Sweden, Switzerland. And then there's some other forms that have popped up in different places. But what you're going to find is that people actually have 8-year-olds. And they've had this conversation at the end of a frustrating day. And over the last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, people in warehousing have started to do this kind of stuff. And during that time, forms have come up. And now, so we have things like anchor modeling, right? We have data vault. But we also have things like hyperagility, focal point modeling, 6NF, like, of course, is very much an anchorish concept, temporal modeling, and et cetera, and et cetera. So a lot of these types of concepts have come up. And what I found is that in talking to the people that were involved in creating these things, they all really kind of fit this definition of unified decomposition and ensemble. So Lars would tell you from an anchor perspective, anchor is a form of ensemble modeling. And focal points, it's a type of ensemble modeling. It all falls into that definition. Now there's one that's not quite there, and that's quasi ensemble, you would say. It's a form called head inversion, and it's close, but it has a few static attributes that remain in the hub, so it's not a pure separation of the key from all the parts around it. It does have an ensemble that includes a single key dependency, so that part is similar, right? So you might think to yourself, and this is really interesting because you came here to hear about ensemble, and that's great, and you've heard about anchor, and how many people have heard of focal? Okay, so there's one. You'll probably hear more about it in the next few, it's only been out for about 5-6 years. Actually, maybe 7 now, who knows, could be. Hyperagility, there's a few other forms. But when you're sitting there saying, what am I going to use for my warehouse? It's not, okay, well, I could do a third normal form warehouse. Yeah, I think it's better to do dimensional. Or I could try one of those new wacky things. I could do anchor or vault or hyper, focal or whatever. What it really comes down to is that whole family of crazy things is really one family. It's ensemble modeling. So you're really choosing between the three, one way or the other. Okay, so now a quick view on the number one ensemble out there, which is Data Vault. And of course, many of you are very familiar. But the reason I want to cover this with you right now is because it's important, I think, to come through the ensemble modeling lens as you go to discuss and think further about your vault. How many people are currently running a vault today? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-ish. Some non-committed. If I add the seventh person, the person who is but is too shy to raise their hand, right? You know who you are. Okay, yeah. There's that person. So one thing that could be helpful for this is when you're trying to assess your model, when you're trying to talk to people about what the model is and why you're using it and how it works, the ensemble family designation can be pretty interesting for you here. So for example, I was mentioning earlier, if you were to take wherever you have an existing hub key, grab all the attributes from all the satellites around it, and logically place them into a single table. Obviously, you can do this in your head. You don't have to do it even on paper or in a modeling tool. Ask yourself, is that in third normal form? In other words, do I have a scenario where all those attributes depend only on that key? What's that? Yeah, so there's one variation, right? You'd have to do this in a current time slice scenario, right? You'd have to do this analysis just considering temporality is out of the picture. I'm not considering history here. I'm just looking for a single time slice because all of these forms are using an attribution or context in a separate table, either one table per attribute or name value pair table or attributed table like Vault with our satellites. But each one of those is now, can be or is by design, like in Vault it's by design, is now a two-part key that includes the temporal consideration, the historical time slices, right? So all those things are built with that in mind. They're all built with history in mind. Okay, fair enough. But take the history away, because again, if you were comparing like for like, you'd also have to have a third normal form historized table with a two-part key. Or you'd have to have a type 2 dimension with a two-part key. That's fine. So eliminate that one from the picture. Why is that important, do you think? Anybody want to jump in? Why is it important to do that analysis and be aware of what's happened to your pattern? Guys, like last session of the day, I'm worn out, just had some cake, don't want to talk, all right? Okay, all right, you guys are very shy. I should just like point, but okay. Because if we're trying to be aware of the modeling pattern that we're actually using, it might be good to do an analysis of the pattern to see what it is you're actually using, right? Now think about what would happen. So there's 6, 7 of you that have a vault model today. Go back tomorrow, tonight, log in, whatever, right? Find a hub. Of course, they're easy to find. They all pretty much look the same. That's great. Get all the attributes from the directly connected satellites, pull them all together, and test your third normal form key constraint. Now, you're going to say, I can tell you right now, Hans, I might not be able to do that. Do you think it's common that people can't do that? Do you think it's common that people will not be able to do this? What's that? Different views? Yeah, no, but I'm just even, yeah, different views. Yeah, yeah. But what are the things that we've done as an industry for ensemble modeling, for vault modeling, that would cause that not to apply? What's that? Yeah. Do you have real generic patterns? Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you have a hub link, let me ask you a question. How many people that have your vaults, raise your hand again. Trust me, I'm not going to call on your name. Just raise your hands. All the people that have vaults. Be proud. Come on, I'm proud of my vault. Okay. Keep your hands up for a minute. How many people are using hub, link, and sat only? How many people have another form besides hub, link, and sat? Okay. Of those other forms, how many of those are something like a transactional link? How many of those are some kind of a satellite derivation, like multi-valued, multivariant satellite? Yeah, well, bridges and pit tables and those things really don't count so much because those are more just for performance. That's not where your core data is being stored, right? But just for the core model itself. Well, if you think about it, if you have a repeatable pattern and you design it off a pure vault and you have a hub, link, and a satellite, you would always be able to fold these things back together into a third normal form view, and it would always work, right? But not if you have a multi-valued sat, right? Because what would happen if you did that? Multi-valued sat has a different key than the hub. Well, if it has a different key than the hub, how can I say it's directly dependent on the key of the hub and nothing but the hub in the same way as it would be here? Well, you can't. Now, you can say, well, that's fine. I've got, I'm happy with myself. That's not the relevant point to make here, is it? The relevant point to make here is something about modeling patterns. And in this case, modeling pattern awareness, being aware of the pattern that I'm actually deploying. So if you have a multi-valued sat, you don't have a 3-form ensemble here where you have hubs, links, and sats. What you actually have is hub, link, sat, multi-valued sat, which means that your training materials for your onboarding for new people should have 4, which means that your templates for automation for the repeatable pattern should have 4, which means that the people designing should understand the components they use for design are 4. The people that are writing the ETL to draw the data out to build a Mart should understand there's 4, because each of those behaves differently, right? Okay, so another one would be end dating with the links for driving keys, which if you wanted to convert that to pure form, just put the end dating in a satellite, do an effectivity satellite, right? But again, the question is not a matter, and I think this has got to be really clear, this is not a matter of a discussion on what your pattern should be. It should be being aware of your pattern. And I think what the benefits of being aware of your pattern is to be able to deploy effectively and get all the benefits you're anticipating to get. That's the big part of this, right? By the way, what do you think the #1 sin is? If you're going to sin, if you're going to do something bad in your model, what's probably the #1 sin, do you think, you can do to a vault model or to any ensemble model. What's that? Oh, yeah, okay, so yeah, modifying a hub or link in any way with context or dating really kind of messes it up. Hubs and links form a backbone, and actually anchors and ties form a backbone that should be just permanent structures. Okay, yeah. Okay, now that, I'm going to make an argument. You mean the same business key in two different hubs. So you can be a person with a business key that exists in customer, and you can also exist as an employee. I'm going to say, honestly, from my perspective, that's no sin at all. I think that's actually good modeling practice. Because here, again, we're not so concerned about the master data around a single instance of a key. We're a little bit more concerned about the data that is surrounding a core business concept. So for example, if I were interested in which customers are also employees, I could always query that to find out if I wanted to. But to do a higher level abstraction or super type only makes it more difficult to get the data back out. That's something, but again, that's something you can discuss in your own pattern with your own people. But I would say honestly that when you constrain a foreign key to a satellite, of course, it's attached to the hub. But if you have a foreign key in a satellite that gets constrained somewhere else, you pretty much ruin the vault. When you have a multi-active set, you run into a little more risk here as well, because now you're tying to that key another grain of key. So you have to be a little careful with it. That's probably not as big an issue, of course, as constraining a key from a set. So again, this is not a vault class, right? We're here more to talk about ensemble, but in ensemble, we can use as a good example some of the vault things that we've been doing over time. The ensemble in itself is strictly this form. So it's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. There's a few other concepts here that come into play. I shouldn't say concept, it's like using the word key. The key point of this presentation, no. I shouldn't use that word. But the thing that's interesting is that if you look at a collection of concepts that together help describe a customer. So if you needed to have some more information, like insurance, I have a customer and then the customer's vehicles and customer's dependents and things like that. Those things can form a context constellation that also has some unique characteristics in ensemble that drive them together in a very definable way and also help you to have a pattern that's very repeatable and very usable. Okay, so this is the picture. If you were taking a ensemble or vault modeling class, I would tell you this is the number one, probably most important picture you can have in your mind when you're working with any ensemble form. And I think it should be clear, though, that it's not to say that you won't have a form that looks like a multi-valued set or a transactional link or whatever. It's not that you won't have them. It's understanding that they don't fit as part of this component, right? You're blending a little bit of patterns there when you do that, which can be very effective. But if you're trying to assess, document, repeat your pattern, it's really good to know this information, because you should at least, at a minimum, be saying, if I can't reverse this arrow and create a type 2 conforming dimension or a third normal form entity that falls into proper form, then I've really not just practiced unified decomposition in its purest sense. If I can, of course, I have. And that's also a good little thing to know. So now each of you can put under your little name tag, right? You can put ensemble/data vault model reviewer as your title, because you're now authorized. I authorize and ordain all of you to go out and review models, because you can do this model review pretty damn quick and say, hey, you guys, here's what you're doing. Your pattern has hub, link, sat, multi-valued sat, and transactional link. Show me the design patterns for these. Show me the loading patterns. Show me how you've communicated this to your team. And they go, well, right? Thumbs up. Maybe we have, maybe we haven't. But you can do that now with this excellent skill. Okay, so applying the pattern. This is, again, true of all Ensemble, right? So we have a technique that says we start with defining a core business concept, and then as we define it, we associate with it an instance or a key. Now, I'm going to tell you that there's something interesting about this. So since most of you have heard something about Vault, you've heard probably a lot of conditioning about business key, business key, business key. How you doing today, business key? What? You know, just, it comes up all the time, right? Oh, your Vault modeling, oh, that's great. Yeah, links have a business key, right? Yeah, okay. Comes up all the time. I may say something blasphemous to you, like forget about the business key. Are you shocked? I saw 2 eyebrows go up. Huh? What? Forget about the business key. Can you be right? What are you talking about? Of course, the business key is everything to the model, right? Is it? Is it? I would argue with you that if you want to start afresh, or if you're working on a model, your first point of entry, your first discussion should, of course, A, be with a business, and secondly, be around identifying core business concepts. And this is going to feel very natural to several of us because we're going to be like, well, person, place, thing, event, but you mean like the actual stuff that goes on? Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. Why is that important today? Well, because we tend to do a lot of source-facing warehouse deployments. We'll create a lot of things with types and hierarchies and role-playing and all kinds of stuff like that. How many people have heard that it's a little more difficult to get data out of something like a Vault or an Ensemble? Anybody heard that? Okay, so, right. So the challenges are not getting the data in, of course not. Because of the parallel loading, holy cow, right. Getting the data in, if that's your problem, consider a different career path because that's not where the issue is. Getting the data out can be an issue. Well, let's think about that for a minute. If I need to go and say, I've got some transactional details for a metric. I got sales, for example. And I want to get sales by customer region. So I'm going to get out the postal code. So what I'm really looking at doing here is sales by product by region of the customer, or the postal code of the customer. If you have a thing called customer, you can go directly to that thing and grab the postal code, and you're done. Your dimensional component is already available for you. And because I'm speaking in 2015, that's really great for virtualization, aka in-memory, data mart delivery. So wow, fantastic. You guys are now super agile. But if you were to say, oh, well, let me go grab that, but I'm going to get the link or the association, but we're vaulting, so we'll say link. Get the link to the person table, then go to the subtype value equals customer, join that back, and then subset by that, and then go back to the thing. Now I've said, well, I got 3 joins in a process to get the same information that was 1 join before. What's even worse is this whole I can only have 1 record thing, because now I have to have a list of persons, a sale, a link to it, plus also a link to the type to filter it by that type, because it could be, in other words, I want to save space. So I don't have an instance for everyone as a customer and as a vendor and as an employee. I have to have a relationship to type it. If I do that, I now have a 2-pass 5-join process to just get the information on the postal code for the customer, for your fact. Again, every time we do this, we just make it more complicated and difficult to get data back out. So it kind of makes sense, to do it this way. The other problem we have is source facing. If you start off again with the first word of the whole data warehousing thing, it's integrated. Okay. How many source systems do you have? 5, 22, 118, 200. Just using some numbers I hear all the time, so fine. Okay. All these numbers are greater than 1, which means you're integrating data into your warehouse. Great. So otherwise, you'd just be a single source analytics app of some kind. But you're integrating data into one place. What are you going to integrate into? Because you know what we've been doing, right? Is we've been trying to integrate data into whatever happens to be the way things were designed in the first source that's in scope. Why? Because I take the first source in scope and I vault it, historize it, and start working with it. But the other sources don't all match. We're not deployed in MDM. No company in the world is fully deployed in MDM, so I'm pretty safe saying that, right? I don't have a complete glossary of all terms. So these systems will conflict with each other. How come that system got to be the one that's the foundation of my warehouse? It was the first one? Yeah, that's not loving that, right? We talked about earlier that a big push now for warehousing is going to be conceptual logical modeling, which is working with a business. What do you guys do here? Okay, core concept, core concept. Oh, we sell products to customers in our stores. Our employees, okay, great. Got it. I get where you're going with this. Perfect. Do some requirements analysis on your data marts. We need sales by region, by customer, by product. Cool. I'm getting an idea right off the bat what your core concepts are, and I can model to those. Secondarily, what's now the enterprise-wide business key? Well, hopefully, right? The enterprise-wide natural business key. Let me ask you a question. And please, you have to just wake up for a minute to answer the one question. So, how many of you have an enterprise-wide unique natural business key? You mean you found one table that had one? You struck gold? Yeah, once in a while, okay. More than 10% of the time. All right, so no hands going up. And I'm not going to fight you on that because, again, the point is you're not going to find them. Well, why don't we have enterprise-wide unique natural business keys? Because they don't exist. If I'm going to assure uniqueness in a certain system, I may use whatever techniques I use there. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's some kind of a sequence ID given in the source, right? But if you start to expand that beyond and say, I want it to be enterprise-wide unique across all systems, now what? What can I use to define something like myself, right? I can use a myriad of different codes, passport ID or social security or person number, customer ID, whatever, lots of different things. If I go to more loosely based text attributes and form concatenations, now I'm subject to what? Data anomalies, entry errors, other issues where the keys won't really match. I mean, we all know this. We don't like to talk about it, right? But for the most part, these keys don't exist. We're going to have a problem. If you start your process by getting all caught up in keys, you're never going to get to your warehouse deployment. If you start your warehouse with core business concepts, you can start your first iteration from a modeling perspective in weeks, and it will not be held up. You know what's cool is hubs have this thing, right? It's called a business key. It sits there in the hub, and then we have a sequence or a hash, and then we have a date time and some kind of record source coding. Cool, right? You can design that now. Now when you start to go look at your sources, well, give me the enterprise-wide unique business key for customer. I'm going to throw that in there. Then it's going to say, well, you know what? Here's the thing. We're going to have to probably use the source system identifier plus the country code plus the system code. Then that would make it unique. Okay. But you know what? Start coding that. Throw it in there. Because that's actually logical. That makes sense. We can start doing that. If you're an anchor modeling or focal point, you build the instance first, and then you worry about the key later. So keys can attach, but they're not wrapped up in the hub. They're just another thing attached to it. That's interesting as well, right? So you can have a little more freedom. So I would say starting with a source makes no sense. As we say in the US, it's a tail wagging the dog. It doesn't really work. Start with what it is you're going to integrate into, then your first in-scope source system, turn to it and say, map this thing into this. Map that source into the target. The target is the enterprise-wide view. Establish your concepts before you get crazy about keys. Because if you get crazy about keys, you're going to miss the point, right? If, for example, there's a large company that provides operating systems that has a huge CRM, it's all around customer, but there is no source system in their entire ecosystem that provides a table called customer, or client for that matter. So if you were looking for keys in this scenario, you would go to this company and say, yeah, no, you guys don't have any customers. No customer business keys, so you guys don't have it. No CRM for you. And yet, if you were to go around the business, you might have people talking to you about how critically important it is for them to get a 360 view of their customers. How is that possible? That's an extreme example, isn't it? Sure, but it's true. It is a real example. So focusing on core business concept will get you the targets you're looking for your data warehouse, for your analysis. From there, go to your sources and go in. And that's going to be true, again, of all ensemble methods. And if you're still conditioned the way you were 5, 10 years ago with encapsulation on key dependency in a table, and you just got comfortable with decomposition, and then now we're saying be a little comfortable with kind of loosening your grip on the business key, you're probably going to go home and cry tonight. It sounds really wrong. But in Ensemble, just interesting point, several of these very core techniques like anchor and focal have already done that. They've separated the key from the instance. Interesting that that's happened, isn't it? So ensemble modeling includes all those variations. Enter the concept of big data. How does an ensemble work in a big data world? Well, one of the first questions could be is, what's big data really mean? What's that? It's a tricky question, right? Are we talking about the architectural hardware data management solutions? Or are we talking about qualifiers on the data itself? Well, high volume, high velocity, veracity, volatility, okay, variety. Bunch of V's in there flying around. We like V's. We like acronyms. Or is it the way we store it? Well, interesting, if you think about the way we store in big data solutions, it's pretty much entirely 100% name value pair. Well, but it could be name value pair as actually name value pair, like record identifier, name and value. Or it could be transposed, and you can say record identifier, open paren, name value, name value, name value, name value, name value, close paren. Or in really kind of almost totally unstructured, open paren, value, 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 value. Right. We have no idea actually what goes on in there. But either way, the point is, whether we have a schema or don't, XML, JSON docs, MongoDB, whatever, all these forms come down to, I don't really know the attribution. So when you tell me the attribution, you're going to have to tell me the name of the attribute and the value and join them for me, and then give me a succession of those things so I can piece them together. Okay, fair enough. The row ID tells us something, tells us about a delivery. This row came in about something. About what? About what? About something. Do you mean about person, place, thing, or event? Do you mean some information about a core business concept like customer? Because if you do, that's cool. Because why can't I have a hub that has a satellite that happens to be in a different form? It's name value pair. Well, if you're in hyper agility or focal point, that's exactly what you have. You have them in name value pair. Why? Exactly the same reason why we do any of this stuff from the hardware architecture perspective. Schema on read. Well, why is that? Because if I have schema on write and something changes, I got to change it, re-engineer it. If I have schema on read in the satellite, if you add me a new attribute, I just change nothing. Just loads more into that record, or loads another column with the same record ID. No big deal. There's no changes at all. Now, of course, it's harder to work with because when I got to draw the data back out, I got to say, oh, well, do you have an attribute for zip code? Oh, AKA check postal code or region code or code, whatever. Doesn't matter. Pull all those, aggregate them, whatever. Whatever you got to do. It's not as easy to work with, but the backbone, right? Your hubs and links, your core concepts, instances or keys, or both, like in Vault, and your relationships, links or ties, form a backbone that's going to be the same either way. It's going to be the same thing. You could even argue that ensemble modeling methods are optimized for working with big data environments. Oh, think about that for a minute. If we say we do our conceptual modeling, our logical modeling, and even down to the point of physical, but let's just say psychological for now. But when I actually deploy and implement, I'm going to have to change to work in a different way. I can do that, maintaining the core foundation of any ensemble. Customer is related to sale. Sale also has an employee. Sale also has a region and a store. And it has a detailed line item level with a bunch of products. All these things can be in the model before you consider how that's going to be deployed from a big data hardware perspective. So it kind of makes sense. It works conceptual, logical, physical. It envelops those capabilities or possibilities for you. Okay, one way or the other. All right. I'm going to say one more point because we're running low on time, and then maybe a little Q&A. You guys won't be able to see this. You might be able to see this. I don't know. I'll make it go closer to you. The thing I was talking about earlier is you have a hub, and let's say we have a satellite. It's not the proper colors. Don't have a yellow one, but we have a satellite, and it defines for me information about that key. Or I have a name value table, or I have a anchor attribute table. Whichever, it doesn't really matter. Point is they're all tied. If you look at it, I'm sorry? Did somebody? Yeah, okay. If you look at it, right, this stuff will be one join away using the same key as the hub. So it's dependent on the same key. This will be the fastest way for you to ever get data from your warehouse into a virtualized Mart or into any other delivery. If you look at this picture here, this ensemble, it's basically a conformed dimension. It has all the history, all the time stamps, all the attributes, all available. But it's agile. It's responding to changes in structure and form. It's adapting quicker and easier. As soon as you start to try to get clever and say, well, I'm going to have these are fat markers. Ugh. I'm going to have a link here to another hub that has attached to it a whole series of possible values, right, for postal code. What's happening? It's no magic here, right? I'm saying, okay, now I'm further from the key. So I've got more work to do. Now I've got to say, okay, I'm going to join to the link or tie, whatever, join to the hub and go here and grab the value. So now I'm 3 joins away. If I type it, which is one of the benefits of doing this, so I can have a single instance of all these things, I'm also adding another typing part here that says, like that. So now again, it's a two-step 5-join process to get the same information that could have folded in. Do you think it's more cumbersome to work with the two-step 5-join process getting an attribute, or just grabbing the attribute? If you look at it, if you look at this as folding into a dimension, if I had to go through this constellation every time I grabbed an attribute for dimension and all the different ones, what would it take to do it? How much more complicated is it? Right? The real benefits of Ensemble sit right here. Core business concept, directly define it. When I come into you and give you my buy report, right? I want unit sales by product, by customer, by region, by class. Okay. Product, grab, go. Region, grab, go. Class, right? Just bam. It's easy. It's right there. It's just another way of presenting that conform dimension. But now I have the advantage of, here's my gold record. Here's what SAP says it is. We don't really use that, but sometimes you might want to know. Here's these attributes that change every other day. Here's ones that never change. It's that benefit of being able to represent dimensional views in some other different way. Being able to present it in a different way, right? That's where our advantages come in. Why is it we do this? Well, we tend to do that because it's going to make the model more flexible, right? Or it's going to help manage master data instances for business key. I want to make sure there's only one Hans ever in that system. So I'm going to have a involved party called Hans. And then everywhere he could be used in the system, I'm going to wire in using that technique. Cool. That will make sure you have one Hans in your system, and that's pretty interesting, but it's going to be really bad to use, right? I'm going to say, oh, I can't just have a home address and a shipping address. I have to have an address hub with an address type hub, so I can have expanded sets of all kinds of different types. Okay, time out. Honestly, how many types do you have? How many types define that key? Not how many types live in your whole model, but how many types can define that key? Well, home and billing and shipping and vacation home. And yeah, well, okay, that's about it. Fine. Now build your attribute sets. They're directly attached. Much easier to work with, right? It's just a different way of taking the thinking all the way through. Genesee Academy, the company I work with, we do Data Vault certification as a primary activity for the last 8 years, probably. So thousands of people have gone through to get certified in Vault. Currently, we're doing that in a lot of different countries, so we're pretty busy these days. You probably could see online the different places we go to do that certification. Also, there's some online stuff for Data Vault. You can actually go to the YouTube channel, and that stuff's just up there to watch. We also do videos as part of Data Vault Academy, but primarily they're used in a blended learning with the classroom. So we do them in combination with each other. I've got a book you can see. How many people have seen it, have it? Book, yeah, several of you guys do. Modeling Agile Warehouse with Data Vault. So there's some concepts around Ensemble, some around data warehousing, Agile, how to deploy Agile, but also, of course, the really fundamentals of all Vault are in there, if it's interesting to you. And yeah, I'm Go Hans Go on Twitter. And as I always say, don't ask, just accept. It's Go Hans Go. Should be Hans Hultgren, I'm sure. On LinkedIn, Hans Hultgren, you can catch me there. If you're not involved so much in these, if you start to want to look more at Ensemble, on my blog, there's a bunch of downloadable little snippets and PDFs you can grab there. There's not a lot beyond that right now. A lot of it's embedded into the course or into this book. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think as we get into the next 2 years here, GA will be doing a lot more focus on the certification training for other forms as well. So that's kind of where the emphasis is. Now I hesitate to even say it, but any questions this brings up or issues or concerns? Yeah.
I think it was one of the one with the icebergs going up with the statement on the business keys. So I can see that it's agile, but where do you really do the data integration then? Because yes, you've got a data node more with a hub which has got IDP,
Yeah.
but data across source systems and especially with third party, it's not integrated in the real sense.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I think it's interesting because if you have any way of knowing from a source-defined perspective that this key and this key are the same, we can load them into the same key, right? We're always going to have a bunch of degenerate keys. And we actually use a concept now called BOK, which is a form of satellite, and it stands for bag of keys. And the point is anything that's alternate, substitute, candidate, atomic parts from a concatenated key, degenerate keys, whatever, throw them in a sat BOK, because then you can just keep track of all the different weird variations. But other than that, of course, it's when you have multiple instances that represent the same person and we have no idea that's true at the time we load, we have to load them both or all three or whatever the number is. And then through some dedupe logic, deploy same as links. And again, if the logic that did the same as the deduping process were 100% accurate and source driven, you wouldn't have to do it that way. But it's because it's not. We typically will have same as links deployed. Then we can say based on the current rule set, these are the same key or the same instance and use it. So, and that's true in Anchor as well. It's the same kind of concept there. Yeah. I mean, not to be sarcastic, but I think one of the issues or disservices, one of the things that causes us all stress or anxiety is we base our warehouse on a natural business key, which is the database equivalent of a unicorn. It's cool looking. I've seen pictures of it. Haven't really seen them in real life. Yeah, VIN number on a vehicle, maybe a person number in certain circumstances. If you've done a PDI or customer data integration and you have a master, fine, but it's extremely rare for us to ever find those keys. So as a warehouse, I think we have to be realistic and say it's our job to sort it out. But if we wait till we have those keys, we'll never build a warehouse. So crazy as that is. Okay. Anything else on Ensemble? Vault, Anchor? Focal? Hyper? Name value pair? No? All right. I'll give you one last thing as you're leaving then, okay? Vault modelers, just a consideration. Consider a extra satellite in your model that's name value pair. Just a rogue extra satellite that's name value pair. That way, if you ever have the situation where an attribute arrives that's not part of the current schema attributed in your satellites, you can just code into all your ETL, right? If it's not found here, drop it in, transpose it, throw it in name value pair. That thing will now make sure that all data is 100% loaded, which is one of the theoretical benefits of the name value pair. But it allows you the attributed schema as well as the benefit. It works, you don't have them in Netherlands, or you probably have them in Germany. It works like the alarm in your basement that forms a connection when you have water in your basement. There's not supposed to be water in your basement. So if there is, let the alarm go off. That's good. So there's not supposed to be an attribute we don't know about. But if there is, let the alarm go off. I want to capture that and load it. So I'll leave you with that. Okay? Yeah, I don't know, you're right. I mean, if you're doing like a standard file for a load, then it wouldn't show up there anyway. But if you're getting feeds where the attribute could show up, of course, yeah. Yep. All right, thanks. I think we're out of time. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over, but it's going to be beer soon, wine, I guess. So that's good. Thanks.